Gradients are a way to add some very nice gradation in color, from a light color to a dark color, and even a multitude of colors in your Illustrator document. As you see here, I have a regular old rectangle, and it has a white fill. What I'd like to do to start a gradient off is to choose the default gradient. I can either use the linear or the radial, or any of the color ones here. So I'm going to start with the radial, and then I'm going to show you that if we go to the window menu and choose our gradient panel, and I'm going to choose my swatches panel, that we have the tools to change how our gradient works in this document. But before we actually start to play around with the colors, let's talk about the gradient tool here. What you can do with the gradient tool is determine how the gradient is going to be presented in your shape. For example, if I click here and hold my mouse here, I'm able to change the start and end point of the gradient. And as you see here, I have a spotlight effect because I went in a very small increment to drag that out. Now I'm going to change this into a linear gradient. And using the same tool, I can change how the gradient works. I can even have a diagonal gradient, a very tight gradient, and a very loose gradient, all depending on how far you stretch your start and end points with your mouse. Now let's talk about how to change the colors in your gradients. And that brings me to the gradient panel as well as its buddy swatches. These guys here are called stops, and this is a gradient slider. What we can do here is we can drag a color directly on top of a stop like this little house shape thing. And we can drag another one onto the other house shape thing, once again called a stop, to change the gradient. We can then use the slider to determine how much of that color is going to have influence in that gradient. So as I push green closer to yellow, more and more green shows up in the transition, and likewise with yellow. I can also add more colors at any time by clicking on the bottom to add more stops. And I can drag colors on each one of those stops to have a nice rainbow thing going on. I can also click and drag a stop and put it wherever I want to change how the colors are presented. If I'm not happy with the gradients, I can drag a stop straight down to pull it off the slider. Once again, I can go to my gradient tool and drag out how I want that gradient to work, and then add colors at any time by adding more stops. Once you do add more stops, don't forget you have these guys here, so you can determine how much of a squeeze each color is going to have. Usually in the middle, you're going to have a nice smooth transition, and it's going to get more harsh as you go closer to the stops. So pretty much in a nutshell, that's the gradients. Oh, one more thing before we go with this lesson. You can also manually enter an angle instead of using the gradient tool, as well as a location for the stops. You notice when I move the stop, the location changes here, the number. So pretty much that's it. That's how you create and change a gradient.